Pums, good to speak to you this afternoon. Just walk us through what you've got lined up for us over the next few hours and certainly some of those conversations that we can look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely, Hugo. I mean, right here at the Apartheid Museum, one would think that on a Saturday afternoon it wouldn't be that busy. It is truly busy with all sorts of people walking the halls of the museum, trying to get exactly what it is that the history of South Africa entails. And part of the conversations that we will be having this afternoon is really reflecting on the laws that defined apartheid and what it looks like now that it is entrenched in the Constitution and that the laws have changed, what it looks like for the man on the ground, the lived reality of South Africans. But before we get to that conversation, I mean, in the past 18 months, we've seen rhetoric from the U.S. peddling a white genocide happening in South Africa. And interestingly, in the past couple of days, the halls of the Apartheid Museum have seen an unexpected guest, and that is the newly elected U.S. ambassador to South Africa coming to the museum and subsequently tweeting a very interesting message on X. But to talk to me about the weight of history and really just what modern day geopolitics mean, particularly between the relationship between the U.S. and South Africa, is head of history workshop at the University of Wits, and that is Professor Noor Nieftagodien. Thank you very much for your time, Prof.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
I mean, let's, in fact, before we go, we look at the relationship between, or rather, the visit from the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. Let's look at the relationship between the U.S. and South Africa dating back to the 1950s.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, of course, there have been important shifts related to the kind of government that has existed in the United States over that period after the Second World War. And of course, the two periods that have defined South Africa since the Second World War. But what is fundamentally important is that throughout that period, most United States governments, at least until the late 1980s and early 1990s, were very firm supporters of apartheid. And that was particularly the case under Republican parties. So Ronald Reagan, Bush, etc. And especially in the 1980s, and this is particularly relevant to the current ambassador in South Africa, the United States under Ronald Reagan, together with Margaret Thatcher from the United Kingdom, were amongst the most ardent supporters of apartheid. They were very firmly against the ANC. They were very firmly against any liberation organization in South Africa, as was the case in other parts of the world. So the United States, in the 1950s and 1960s, one could say that its politics was defined to a large extent by the way that it tried to spread its imperial control over the rest of the world. And what exemplified that were perhaps two incidents, there are many that one could give examples of, but two that are relevant today. The first is the involvement of the CIA in the overthrow of the democratic government in Iran in 1953, because the President Mossadegh aimed to nationalize the oil in the country so that the people of Iran could take control of their own oil production and oil exports. And of course, the second one was the Vietnamese War, and that led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people in Vietnam. Now, I'm making those two examples because what that tells us about the United States in this period was that it exemplified imperial control over colonized people, and by the 1980s, many countries had achieved their independence with the exception of South Africa and Namibia. And in a sense, white South Africa was the last stronghold of white colonial rule in the world, which is why the United States under Ronald Reagan was so firmly behind the apartheid government. Now, since then, of course, things have changed, right? Because we've had a democracy, and therefore other countries in the world have had to confront our democracy, our constitution, and our attempt to build a democratic society. But we've seen under successive governments, particularly under Donald Trump, this attempt to undermine South African sovereignty. And of course, South Africa is not the only country suffering from this attack on its sovereignty. Other countries are suffering.
Yeah.
But it seems like Trump, this white supremacist, has a particular bone to pick with South Africa, this black majority government. And that is because, as Trump has said on many occasions, for him, Africa, and I know I can't use the word on national television, but we all know how he referred to the rest of the continent in very degrading and obscene terms, and sees South Africa as one of the countries that is prepared to criticize the policies of the United States. So we've had fairly good relations, at least at a diplomatic level, but that has come apart under Donald Trump.
So that's interesting. I mean, given that history and even the very recent history and relations between the U.S. and South Africa, what do we make then of Bosel's visit to the Apartheid Museum? Do you see it as an attempt to acknowledge apartheid and all it brought to South Africans, or is it some kind of symbolism for a reset of relations between the U.S. and South Africa?
That's a fantastic question, and I think it's probably neither of those. I think that one needs to understand where Bosel comes from. He is an ideal ambassador for Donald Trump. He has no diplomatic experience. He's not served in any diplomatic role until then, until his appointment now. He was in the media, and he was part of an organization called the Media Review Center in the 1980s. So like Donald Trump, he loves the media, has no political experience except to promote white supremacist ideas. And in the 1980s, he was part of a committee that was fundamentally opposed to the ANC. Who called Nelson Mandela a terrorist, called the ANC a terrorist, supported apartheid. So there's a deep irony when someone who has consistently supported white supremacy, who has consistently called organizations and people who have fought for their freedom as terrorists. So for him to come here, what is the symbolism? I think he is, quite frankly, trying to show South Africa a middle finger, right? Because this is a person who has made it his project as the ambassador to support the idea of white genocide in South Africa, to support the process of getting white refugees, Afrikaans-speaking whites, into the United States, and to promote this false idea that there is a white genocide.
Well, Prof, I hear you, and the evidence is there that he's really peddling Trump's agenda, right? But subsequent to his visit to the Apartheid Museum, he tweeted, "Today, visiting the Apartheid Museum was a profound reminder of the courage and sacrifice that shaped South Africa's democracy. What a powerful moment to listen and learn. As the United States celebrates 250 years of independence, I am reminded that liberty and justice are shared ideals and values that bind the people of the two nations."
Yeah, and so I would say that he has to prove himself. Right? His entire history demonstrates that those words are empty words. He supports, and it comes from a government that undermines democracy. We have seen that in the United States with the way that ICE has attacked the democratic system in the United States, has killed US citizens. We have seen how the United States government is behind some of the most egregious acts in the world. Kidnapping a sitting president in Venezuela, attacking Iran in an entirely unprovoked way, supporting a genocide Israel's genocide in Gaza. So when someone like this, utters these words, we have to be critical. We have to say to him, if you believe what you've said, if you say that constitutional democracy is something that you believe in, then you have to demonstrate this in practice. One, you have to say, because the facts speak for themselves, that there is no white genocide in South Africa. Let's start there, because this is your project. declare very clearly that you are in a democratic country in which all people have constitutional rights. And those people, like AfriForum and Solidarity, who promote the idea of a white genocide, are fundamentally wrong because the statistics reveal that this is a falsity. Secondly, you have to criticize the real genocides that are taking place in the world. Okay? Then I would like to add this point, which is, see, the Trump regime, and Bozell, they are media savvy people. They speak to a certain constituency, so they know what to say and when to say. Now, he came to this museum, which on the one hand shows the horrors of apartheid. Okay? It also shows how black people over a long period fought against white supremacy, fought for freedom. And yet, in the United States, Donald Trump, supported by people like Bozell, have attacked black history. Donald Trump has said that the museums in the United States must promote what he calls patriotic history. It is a typical case of whitewashing history. What Donald Trump has said, and this is what we should ask Bozell to express an opinion on, Donald Trump has said there is too much slave history being taught in the schools and reflected in the museums.
Yeah.
So when Bozell comes to the Apartheid Museum and he sees in vivid pictures the suffering of black people, and this museum, like other museums that have been created in the democratic era, have been at pains to demonstrate the violence of white domination under colonialism and under apartheid. Is Bozell prepared to say that in the United States, slavery was a crime against humanity? He refers to the Constitution of the United States. The United States was created on the bones and the bodies of the indigenous population in the Americas. There was a genocide. Okay?
So, two very important indicators of a successful tenure for Bozell for you would be, number one, dispel this rhetoric, lies, that there is a white genocide force happening in South Africa, and secondly, re-educate the world not through Western lenses, is what you would say would be the two markers of a successful tenure?
Yes. Well, I would say that he has to educate himself first, okay? And I'm hoping that by coming to the museum, he will have learned something. He will have seen what white supremacy has meant, and that white supremacy has also exists in the United States. And of course, Bozell is part of this white supremacist agenda.
Just before we wrap up, Prof, I mean, South Africa's stance on global conflicts, such as, the ICJ case regarding Gaza, for instance, do those bode well in attempts to mend relationships? I mean, we've already been banned from the G20 happening this year.
No, it doesn't, because Trump and Bozell has been sent specifically to South Africa to do two things. One, to continue promoting the idea of a white genocide, and secondly, to make it difficult for South Africa in its case at the ICJ, meaning it wants to twist the arm of the South African government in relation to the ICJ case. And what that means is that Bozell, like his boss Trump, want to continue perpetuating the genocide in Gaza and the attacks on Iran.
Professor Noor Nieftagodien, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And that's where we leave this conversation